In 1863, a photograph was taken of the Holloway sisters, a tragic picture intended as a post-mortem memorial. One sister, Mary, poses dutifully beside the body of her younger sibling, Eliza, who was believed to be dead. But look closer, and you will see something impossible. In the final image, the eyes of the girl who was supposed to have been buried alive are not closed. They are open, and they appear to be watching. The photographer himself recorded a chilling note in his private diary that during the long exposure, the child's aspect changed. What did the camera capture in that quiet London room? A tragic farewell, or the horrifying moment a girl, pronounced dead, began to wake up? If this story has sparked your interest in the hidden truths of history, consider subscribing to our channel to help keep hidden histories alive. We kindly invite you to share in the comments from which city you are watching from and your local time. We are interested to know how far these documented accounts travel. The photograph itself is small, a carte de visite no larger than a playing card, and faded to the color of weak tea. It shows two young girls from 1863 posed inside a modest London home. The elder sister, her dark hair parted neatly down the middle, sits upright in a stiff, high-collared dress, her hands resting formally in her lap. Her gaze is direct, solemn, a study in Victorian composure. Beside her, propped up carefully on a settee, is her younger sister. She wears a similar dress, white and pristine, and her small body is arranged with a stillness that seems absolute. At first glance, it is an ordinary portrait, one of thousands produced in an era that cherished family keepsakes. But an inscription, written in faded ink on the back of the card and repeated in a family album, tells a different story. It labels the image a mourning photograph, a final, silent farewell. The elder girl, 11-year-old Mary Holloway, was tasked with sitting beside the body of her 9-year-old sister Eliza, who had succumbed to scarlet fever just one day before. In the mid-19th century, such images were not uncommon. Post-mortem photography offered a way for grieving families to preserve one last image of a loved one, particularly a child, in an age when death was an ever-present visitor in the home. These photographs were treated with immense respect, a tangible link to a soul that had departed. The Holloway sisters' portrait seems to fit this tradition perfectly. It is quiet, respectful, and deeply sad. But if you look closer, if you hold the image to the light and examine the face of the younger girl Eliza, the solemn scene begins to unravel. Something is profoundly wrong. Her eyes, which should be closed in the final piece of death, are not. They are ever so slightly open. It is not the vacant, glazed-over look one might expect from a corpse. There is a glint of light on her eyelashes, a hint of focus in the pupils that have not rolled back. It is a detail so subtle it might be missed, but once seen, it is impossible to ignore. It is the look of someone who is not gone at all, but is instead watching from a place somewhere between this world and the next. The man hired to capture this somber moment was a traveling photographer named Mr. Charles Chalmers. He was a professional known for his patience and his meticulous craft, a man accustomed to the delicate and often emotionally fraught business of creating mourning portraits. He understood the need for stillness for capturing an image of serene repose. The photographic process of the 1,860 seconds was slow and unforgiving. Exposure times could last for many seconds, even minutes, requiring the subject to remain perfectly motionless to avoid a blurred, ghostly image. For a living subject, this required discipline. For the dead, it should have been effortless. Yet, in a private diary unearthed in a local archive more than a century later, Mr. Chalmers recorded a single cryptic observation about his session at the Holloway home. He wrote that he had great difficulty with the portrait, not because of the lighting or the chemistry, but because of the subject herself. His entry for that day concludes with a chillingly simple note. The child's aspect changed during the exposure. What could he have meant by that? It was not a simple movement, which would have resulted in a blur. He wrote that her aspect changed, her appearance, her expression. It was a subtle shift, something another person might have dismissed as a trick of the light or a shadow falling across the face. But Chalmers was a man who made his living studying faces, and what he saw that day was unsettling enough to record. Did a muscle in Eliza's face twitch? Did her eyelids flutter? Or was it something more? This single, disturbing entry transforms the photograph from a simple memorial into a piece of evidence. It suggests that Mary Holloway was not sitting with the dead. She may have been sitting with the dying, or, more frighteningly, with a sister who was on the verge of returning to life. This unsettling possibility was not just a flight of fancy, it was rooted in one of the deepest and most pervasive fears of the Victorian era, the terror of being buried alive. In a time before modern medical science, the line between life and death could be terrifyingly thin. Diseases like scarlet fever, diphtheria, and cholera could plunge a victim into a deep, death-like coma, slowing the heartbeat and respiration to levels that were nearly undetectable. A physician, relying on nothing more than a hand to the wrist to check for a pulse or a mirror held to the mouth to check for breath, could easily make a fatal mistake. The fear was so widespread that it led to the formation of societies for the prevention of premature burial and the invention of safety coffins fitted with bells and breathing tubes. For the Holloway family, gathered in their quiet London home, this abstract terror was about to become an intimate reality. The doctor had made his pronouncement, the family had begun to mourn, and the photographer had been summoned to perform his solemn duty. But hidden within the silence of that room, and captured forever by Mr. Chalmers' lens, was a secret that would take generations to fully uncover, a secret whispered in family letters written decades later, which spoke of a great medical error and of Eliza's miraculous return from the shadow. The photograph, meant to be an epitaph, had instead become the opening chapter of a profound and disturbing mystery. To understand the chilling possibility captured in the Holloway photograph, one must first step back into the world of 1863. Victorian London was a city of remarkable progress and invention, but it was also a place where life was fragile, and the boundary between the living and the dead was a source of profound anxiety. Epidemics like scarlet fever, diphtheria, and cholera swept through neighborhoods without warning, often claiming the youngest and most vulnerable. In this environment, death was not a distant event that happened in hospitals. It was an intimate, domestic tragedy. It was this closeness to mortality that gave rise to the practice of post-mortem photography. For a family like the Holloways, a respectable merchant-class household in the leafy suburb of Islington, commissioning a final portrait of their daughter Eliza would have been a natural, albeit heartbreaking, act of remembrance. It was a way to hold on to a physical likeness when memory alone felt too fleeting. But this same culture was haunted by a parallel fear, a quiet, gnawing terror whispered in parlors and printed in pamphlets, the fear of premature burial. Everyone knew stories of coffins being exhumed for one reason or another, only to find scratch marks on the inside of the lid or bodies contorted in a final desperate struggle. The medical science of the day offered little comfort. A physician like Dr. William Reeves, the man who attended to the Holloway family, had limited tools at his disposal. To pronounce a patient dead, he would have relied on simple, fallible signs. He would have felt for a pulse at the wrist or neck, a task made difficult if the heartbeat was faint and thready. He might have held a cool mirror or a feather to the lips, hoping to catch the faintest wisp of breath. But certain illnesses could mimic death with terrifying accuracy, plunging the victim into a cataleptic state or a deep coma where the body's functions slowed to a near imperceptible crawl. The heart might beat only a few times a minute, the breathing so shallow as to be undetectable. To a busy doctor in the midst of an epidemic, seeing dozens of patients a day, a still, cold body that did not respond to stimuli was, for all intents and purposes, dead. And so, with a solemn nod and a few words of condolence, Dr. Reeves declared 9-year-old Eliza Holloway gone, leaving her family to begin their grieving. It was a pronouncement based on experience and observation, but it was a judgment made without certainty, a guess made at the edge of an abyss. It is this profound uncertainty that reframes the scene of the photographic session. The family, trusting the doctor's word, prepared Eliza's body. Her mother, Eleanor, would have dressed her in her finest white dress, a funereal tradition meant to signify the purity of a child's soul. Her older sister, Mary, was then asked to perform the difficult duty of posing beside her. For Mary, it must have been a surreal and deeply sorrowful experience, sitting perfectly still for minutes on end next to the sister who, just days before, had been her playmate. But in the quiet stillness of that room, something was not right. Mr. Chalmers, the photographer, with his keen eye for detail, saw it. His note that Eliza's aspect changed was more than a casual observation. It was the record of an anomaly, a crack in the accepted reality of the situation. While the family saw only their grief, Chalmers saw something else, a flicker of life where none should have been. For decades, the photograph was kept as a sad memento, its true story buried under the weight of family lore. But the truth had a way of surviving, not in official records, but in the private correspondence of the people who lived through it. Letters preserved by Holloway descendants written years after the event speak of the incident in hushed, cryptic terms. One account, written by Mary herself as an adult, states that the doctor was mistaken in his judgment. Another relative wrote even more poetically, noting that Eliza returned to us after the shadow, a phrase that suggests a journey to the very brink of the grave and back again. These fragments, pieced together, point to an incredible conclusion. Eliza Holloway was declared dead, prepared for her mourning photograph, and then, at some point before she could be placed in a coffin, she revived. The photograph, therefore, does not capture a living girl posing with her dead sister. It captures something far more extraordinary and far more unsettling, the precise moment between a mistaken death and a miraculous reawakening. The slight opening of her eyes, the change in her aspect noted by the photographer, was not a trick of the light. It was the accidental documentation of a life reasserting itself against all odds, a silent testament to one of Victorian society's greatest fears made real. For over a century, the story of the Holloway sisters rested on a foundation of whispers and ambiguities. The photograph was the central piece of evidence, a silent witness to a family tragedy. The photographer's diary provided a disturbing clue, and cryptic family letters suggested a hidden truth. But these were fragments, not proof. The mystery remained locked in the past, a chilling anecdote without a final chapter. The definitive answer, however, was not hidden in a dusty attic or a forgotten diary, but in plain sight, waiting in the meticulous, impersonal records of the British government. With the advent of modern genealogy, researchers could finally trace the lives of ordinary people with astonishing accuracy. And so, the search began for Eliza Holloway, the girl who was supposed to have died in the spring of 1863. A death certificate was never found, an oddity in itself for a city as bureaucratic as London. The crucial breakthrough came from the public census, a detailed record of every household in the nation, taken once a decade. If Eliza had died, her name would vanish from the records after 1861. But there, in the returns for the 1871 census, was the undeniable proof. Listed as a resident of a household in a neighboring parish was Eliza Holloway, age 17, occupation, governess. She was alive. She had not only survived the fever of 1863, but had grown into a young woman and begun a life of her own. The girl in the post-mortem photograph had not been dead at all. This single, verifiable fact transforms the photograph from a document of death into a testament of survival. Suddenly, every detail takes on a new, more profound meaning. The image is no longer a memorial to a tragedy that happened, but a snapshot of a tragedy that was narrowly averted. We are not looking at a corpse, we are looking at a child in a deep, coma-like state, her body so still that she could be mistaken for dead. The slight parting of her eyelids, the glint of light on her lashes, these are not post-mortem artifacts or tricks of the camera. They are the first faint signs of a consciousness returning from a place no one could have expected. Mary, the solemn older sister, is no longer sitting with the dead, but is an unwitting guardian at the threshold between life and death. The photographer, Mr. Chalmers, with his careful eye, did not just see his subject move. He became the accidental chronicler of a medical miracle, capturing the precise moment that science faltered and a human life refused to be extinguished. The family's decision to keep the photograph, even labeling it a mourning photograph, now seems less a deception and more a way of remembering the terrifying day they almost lost their daughter forever. It became a monument not to her death, but to her return. The emotional weight of this event on the Holloway family is almost impossible to imagine. For Mrs. Holloway, the mother who had accepted the doctor's word and begun to grieve, the revival of her daughter must have been a moment of both overwhelming joy and chilling self-reproach. How close had she come to allowing her living child to be buried? For Mary, the memory of that photographic session must have been forever altered, the quiet sorrow of the moment transformed into a haunting, miraculous memory. This was the secret they lived with, the knowledge that the official story was wrong, and that they had stood at the very edge of an unthinkable error. Their story, though extraordinary, was a private reflection of a public anxiety. The fear of premature burial was not just a Gothic fantasy. It was a legitimate concern rooted in the very real limitations of 19th century medicine. Every story of a near miss, whether whispered among neighbors or officially documented, added to a growing demand for greater certainty. The quiet terror experienced by families like the Holloways helped fuel the scientific drive that would eventually give us the modern tools we rely on today, the sensitive stethoscopes, the electrocardiograms, and the rigorous clinical standards that separate a deep coma from irreversible death. Progress is often built upon the foundation of human error, and Eliza's story is a quiet but powerful reminder of the life and death stakes involved. At first glance, the Holloway photograph seemed to capture an ending. Now we see it for what it truly is, not an image of mourning, but a silent witness to the moment when a life, dismissed and nearly lost, was miraculously given back.